Welcome to story time. I have a bit of a warning to just share, I guess. The story that I want to share today is in regard to the power of breath, but it speaks specifically to the scariest moment of my life. And that was a moment that involved my firstborn child. So if you have a tenderness around scary things and life-threatening issues with children, then skip this video, right? This is not the one for you. But the reason that I'm sharing it is because even before becoming a yogi, even before finding the practice of yogi, I fundamentally knew the power of breath. In other words, I don't think any of us have to practice yoga to know that it sucks to have the wind knocked out of us, right? A punch in the belly, or for me, it was the bars on my bicycle hitting into my diaphragm and causing me to feel like I couldn't catch my breath. Another episode, I remember being spiked with the volleyball in my face in PE class in high school, and how that just rocked me to my core in terms of being able to breathe. So the story that I'm sharing today is, as a new mom, my daughter was not yet 6 months old. So I think that she was, she was born in March, and this was in the winter, early part of October. So about 5-6 months old. And she'd had some slight fever, to the point where, as a new mom, I was wondering whether or not to take her to the doctors for just a well checkup, right? So just to make sure that everything was in working order. But as I was on the phone with the doctor, meaning the doctor's office, not my doctor specifically, but with the office, and explaining Keiko's symptoms, I watched her face turn blue, her lips turn darker blue, and she had this kind of arched back, and she went really, really stiff, which, again, at this point in my life, I had done very little anatomy study, a very little of the wellness perspectives. I knew enough to understand that turning purple, turning blue in the lips was a sign of oxygen deprivation. And I couldn't see her breathing. I couldn't hear her breathing. And she turned stiff, and her eyes kind of, her eyelids shut, but her eyes kind of rolled up before they fully shut. And I just remember telling the doctor, this is before cell phones, by the way, that I didn't have time. I was on my way to the hospital, and they should meet me there because my child was turning blue and was stiff as a board. Fortunately, you can rest as I do today, because if you know me talking about Keiko, my child, and they have grown up to be full adulthood. So there is a good ending to the story. But for those probably 5 minutes, I could think of nothing other than panic, not knowing how to breathe myself, let alone how to breathe for my infant child. There was nothing in her airway. There was no obstruction. There was no anything to give an indication that breath was unavailable. But as all of that transpired, her fever spiked to about 105 degrees, and she was burning up in my hands while continuing to turn blue. And so fortunately, Peter was home, and we made our way to the car together to transport her to the hospital. We were literally just around the corner from Fairfax Hospital, Fairfax Nova or Fair Nova, or whatever it is. Anyway, the point being that I can remember thinking as we walked out the door, I cannot put my child in her car seat, because how will I know if she's okay? I had to hold her. So as I'm holding her and I walk out the door, the cold, brisk October air hits her face, hits her skin, and she gasps for a breath of air. And I started crying. I just started crying in fear and in celebration and relief that I didn't have to trade one hazard for another. I'm fully on board with buckling children into their car seats, even if it's just to repark the car. So that moment of temporary hijacking my need for safety because of a higher need for life was resolved because she started to cry and to breathe again. So we made it to the hospital, Keiko crying all the way, me crying all the way with tears of gratitude and relief and hope, because as long as there is breath, there is life. And even then, that was the threshold that I understood innately. The challenge here was not whether or not we would define the problem causing this interruption. The problem itself was the lack of breath. So we get to the hospital, the emergency room. They look her over. Yes, she's got a slight fever at this point, but not enough to actually put her in a cold bath. Like her temperature has already started to come down. I assume it's because she's breathing again and because of the cold air. But she and I stay in the hospital for a full week, running every kind of test imaginable, tapping into her spinal cord to eliminate the most dangerous risks. I remember meningitis being one of those on the docket. And after that time, nothing else showed up. Nothing else showed up in terms of any indication of why her fever would have spiked or why she would have had what they later defined as a febrile seizure. Febrile, meaning that her core body temperature got so high that it caused her brain to hiccup, to interrupt. So they sent us home after a week of sleeping on the uncomfortable chair in the hospital and one eye open almost 24 hours a day, watching for her breath to rise and to fall. Now, that was obviously not comfortable and not fun for me, nor was it fun for Keiko. Not that she can remember it, but she was on monitors and she was on all of these apparatus things to make sure that she was safe. But Peter was trying to go about normal everyday life, going to work, and he wasn't allowed to stay at the hospital with her. Only one could attend. So he would visit every single day and bring me some encouragement of a hug and some probably some food. And then we would be with Keiko together for a couple hours with no new information. So while the panic of her not breathing had been resolved, the fear of not knowing the cause really never settled. The best they could say was, well, she may grow out of this. Febrile seizures are not uncommon for children, in which case we don't really understand the cause. Now, when we got home and I was able to then decompress and talk about the story, I was able to learn from my parents that one of my brothers had had a similar episode when he was about the same age as Keiko. There's also a lot of kind of extraneous data, meaning it didn't make it into the time frame of how they track and follow consequences from immunizations. But we were immunizing her on the schedule recommended by our pediatrician. This lay just outside of the 6-week window that they measure. Now, I'm not saying that this is related to an immunization, because babies of that age are getting immunizations almost every 4 weeks. So it's almost impossible to say that. But in the same notion, it really triggered, how can I find the cause? Triggered a need to understand this so that I could avoid that risk in the future, or at least enter into that risk with more preparation to pay attention. My brother is now, actually, he's an MD himself, fully grown into his wellness as an adult and raising a family of his own. So all in all, the consequences have been nothing in the long term for their wellness. But for my understanding, I think that this was only another kind of check in the box of commitment to care, self-care, care of my children, care of others, and the importance and the significance of good breathing. So it's no wonder that the 3 practices of yoga, to breathe, to move in asana, and to contemplate, to introspect, and to still our body with resting from work in order to digest, in order to meditate, in order to introspect. These 3 disciplines are paramount to the way in which I live and cope with my life. Keiko did have a second seemingly febrile seizure another 6 months later, at home, climbing a little children's ladder, and started to quake and fell over. Fortunately, probably because she was a bit older, that one didn't cause the blueness to come through her body, and she woke up almost instantly and was able to regain her play, not even noticing that anything was off. I didn't know for sure at that time, and I still don't know today, that that's what happened, but the familiarity and the similarness was too much not to be. Now, the other 2 kids have never had anything like that. And the closest that I can say to my own experience is when I backbend too far and cut off some of that communication between my brain, the brain stem, I can get loopy and dizzy, right? Or like I said in the beginning of our story time, if you've ever had an impact, a thrust, or perhaps a restriction. I can remember once when I was really young, my brother was sitting on me and I couldn't breathe because there was no room to expand to receive the breath. But these kinds of moments are those that tickle the edge of our tolerance, but they also expand our tolerance when we pay attention and learn from them. And by learn from them, I don't mean that I understand. I mean that I understand through compassion, that I can be with it in my non-knowing. And that's the crux of yoga, to be with what life is presenting, knowing that this too shall pass, whether it's my brother getting off my chest, or even the end of someone's life, their last breath. This moment too shall pass. And yet the power of the breath moves in and through all of us. And we remember the stories of our shared experience. And we retell those stories in order to enhance our compassion and our empathy for one another and for the potential of our own circumstances that are yet to come. So, as is my practice, I am grateful that my child is well. And I am grateful for the fear that my body was able to respond with, to activate action, to push me into, I need more information, I need help, so that I wasn't alone in that very, very scary experience, alone in my ignorance, alone in my heartbreak and fear, but alone in the caretaking of my child. So I consider those challenges as important to my personal yoga growth and practice as the highs of watching them celebrate and succeed and achieve and laugh and cry in their young adulthood today. And I think that that's also helping me to ride those waves of highs and lows, and especially kind of the humdrumness of this again, the meh of doing the same thing again and again. That's part of life. But in that again and again and again and again, with gratitude and attention, we might just see the window of being with something amazing and beautiful. Life itself in the breath. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for sharing this time and the story, not because I'd ever want anyone to have to live in that kind of experience, but because we will all at one point take our last breath and have someone we love take their final breath. This is the practice of savasana in our yoga practice. We practice the little deaths. Hence, we retain our breath, empty and full. Those retentions, those kambakas, are meant to help us practice getting more comfortable at the edges so that when we meet that final edge, it's not in fear, but it's in acceptance. It's in allowing, so we can be with whatever awaits us at that edge. Take care of you. Keep breathing, moving, and resting. And watch for those glimmers of hope and love and breath that are life itself. Be well. Namaste. So when you're here, you get to have a chance to comment or contribute any thoughts or observations or sharings that are on your heart.